Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the Money Talks. And, it's been a while since we've had an investor on the Money Talk. I think probably about 10 or 12 episodes in between. But today we've got a very, very, very interesting guest because, we've all heard of the amazing stories of, an engineer or even a commerce dropout, turning entrepreneur and then becoming investor. But today we've got something really unique. We've got somebody who was a doctor, and it takes a long time for someone to be a doctor in India. And why this person who's been a doctor, who's been then became a professional in the healthcare space, went off to the US, was probably making big bucks. I'm not going to ask how much, but probably was when he was in the health space in the US, and then he turned investor. So this is going to be a very interesting journey. I think many of you guys who are in the health tech space, he's one of the investors, one of the most sought out investment groups in the space, simply because the kind of depth and the kind of width this investing house brings. So without further ado, I would like to invite Pankaj Jethwani. Pankaj, welcome, Dr. Pankaj Jethwani, to episode 48 of the Money Talks.
It's a pleasure to be here, Anirudh. Thank you for having me, and a very cool video to start. I haven't seen that before, so kudos to your team.
So now you're part of it from next episode onwards, by the way.
That's perfect. That's great.
So Pankaj, we're talking in that few minutes before we went live that you have a very interesting journey, and we have so much to cover, especially such an interesting topic. So I'm going to dive right into it. Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you started off in Bombay. You have an MBBS, from the Maharashtra University, and then you also got an MBA from Wharton. Love to know, when you grew up, like what were you think? What were you thinking? You wanted to be a doctor? You wanted to be an investor? What was the thought? And a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a series of disconnected points. I grew up in a middle class family in Mumbai. Middle class, upper middle class family. Always as working professionals. The conversation on the dinner table was always around work and academics, right? Like the only time I would probably see my father was late in the night, and the only thing we spoke about was work and business and what is happening in the world, and belonged to a family of immigrants, right? My grandparents immigrated from Pakistan to come to a small village outside of Nagpur called Yautmal. Obviously now that's grown to become a small town, and they basically started from scratch, leaving everything aside, and that was the same journey for my father, right? He was one among 8 siblings, was the first to get educated, and then moved from Yautmal to Mumbai to basically start from scratch, try to complete his education and try to work. So
what was the line of work your father is in?
He was a chartered accountant.
Achha.
Yeah, so he took a long time to complete his degree because he was always working. He had 2 or 3 jobs to support his new family, and so he took 8 or 9 years to complete his chartered accountancy, and then he started was working for someone, and then started his own practice 25 years ago. Yeah.
And so but your dad is a chartered accountant, obviously dealing with lots of numbers and money and etc. And where was the ambition? Like, what was the motivation to be a doctor?
So my brother was my older brother went into medical school, and I was always inclined with around business, and suddenly growing up, he was a role model to me, like my brother, and it seemed interesting. Obviously, I loved science as a kid. I was a fairly nerdy kid, and thought let's give it a shot, and let's see where we go. So when
it must have been a grueling experience, right? I mean, you also did your residency in Mumbai.
Yeah, so it is interesting, right? I really enjoyed the science behind medicine. Always had in the back of my mind that, at some point, when I'm an established physician, maybe 10, 15 years down the road, maybe I'll do something entrepreneurial, maybe I'll start my own business. And, you're sitting in the hospital all day, when you're training, and there are always things to fix around, right? And sometimes when you're studying, you're have this optimistic view about, okay, I'll fix this, ye fix karunga, wo fix karunga. Those were the times where there were no startups in healthcare. There was no like pharmacy.
True.
There was no, and it's like, oh, what if there was? Why do I have to like, walk to a pharmacy to get stuff? And like all these things were,
How can I make it
uh,
simpler? Yeah.
yeah. How do we simplify this mess that we're in? And like why? And so I had that optimistic bubble, and then when I started working, I was working at JJ Hospital in Mumbai that you might be familiar with.
Hmm.
Large government hospital. Also did some private practice, um, and there started seeing what 200-300 patients a day. Care.
Wow.
It was 2-3 minute interactions of a patient, and care was like very, you lost count, right? At some point you don't count, but like care was like very reactive and symptomatic,
Hmm.
and not the kind of care I would want to give, say, my parents. Um, but that was fine, right? That was the need of the hour, and life goes on. And when you're under like that kind of pressure, that kind of like just burnout, you start losing a little bit of empathy, right? You
Sure.
come in very idealistic, and then over time, the empathy wears out a little bit, and then suddenly the same problems that you'd want to fix initially start becoming really irritating. Like, why is it that my supplies are running out? Like, why is it that these patients are not like behaving, or why is it that the patient's relative is not letting me like communicate with the patient? Like, a lot of the things that you'd want to fix start becoming like pain points, and some of us have turned into like, from an idealistic young like student of medicine, turn into this slightly arrogant, very burnt out, and kind of pessimistic young doctor. um, and yeah, but I continue to like enjoy seeing patients, right? That was it gives instant gratification, right? To, especially when you're working in primary care, it gives a lot of the work that we did had short term improvements in patients' life, which was gratifying. I had some like series of like personal experiences. One of the most major being that my father, around that point, was diagnosed with a very late stage, brain tumor, and like it was really
Oh.
close to him, and then suddenly, from being a physician to 300 patients or 200 patients a day, arrogant, losing empathy, angry, I suddenly became a caregiver, and for my father, I would wait in the same queue as he did for 2 hours to see an oncologist, because there were only two of them in Mumbai that did, that specific type of brain tumor. Wait with the same patients at Tata Memorial, who,
Yeah.
some of them who could afford, some of them who could not afford treatment. Waited,
And that can be a very humbling sight outside Tata Memorial, right? Because so many
yeah.
people that need care.
Yeah, and just going through him through that 8 or 9 month process of treatment, was brought a lot of that empathy back, right? Like that, this is something, I, yeah, there are lots of things to fix. We were obviously fortunate to have him get the best treatment possible at that time. There were limited options, but the best treatment possible at that time. But a lot of people around him weren't as fortunate, and a lot of like caregivers around him weren't as fortunate. And so then, it wasn't really a decision after that. It was like I had to show face. I thought that I want to do something entrepreneurial eventually and try to fix some of these problems. And I was like, I can sit and crib about them, or I can try doing something about them. And the least expensive time to try doing it is right now, when I'm just starting off.
True.
So it wasn't a decision, wasn't a savvy decision at all. It was more, I think it was more emotional, more spiritual. I don't even think it was emotional. It was more spiritual, that I have this one shot at trying to do something, and that motivation is there today. It won't be there sometime go, sometime in the future, and maybe let's take a plunge. And so I decided, it is, the kind of, so one fine day I was like, okay, I'm not going to practice anymore. I won't go to the US to, the career path was, okay, now go to the US, 2 years,
Specialization.
subspecialization,
Yeah.
and work there, on the footsteps of so many of my friends and peers, and my family who had done that before, and venture into the world of, on the business side of the healthcare world. trying to fix some of these problems I had, and that gave a lot of relief. But then the next question was, what do I do? I had no clue, right? Like, and a lot of my mentors and seniors are like, are you crazy? Are you just depressed? You just want to take some time off? Like, what is really happening here? This is a big move. And I didn't know what to do either. So but I was clear that I need to give it one shot. And I was fortunate enough to have a really good fallback option. Going back into seeing patients was always an option. So
And so
then,
that
yeah.
you started off with was that when you joined Samhita, or what was the path from there?
Yeah, so the one advice that I got was that work for someone to really learn. There's a lot to learn, and that's what I was at a I told you my life was a series of coincidences. So just got incredibly lucky at a lot of times. I was at a conference. I used to do some public health work at that point. So I
Acha.
was speaking on a panel in a conference, and when you're not sure of what to do, you tend to attend a lot of these conferences, right? So was there, and then after the panel, I met this gentleman. He came up to me. He's like, so what is it that you're doing? What is it that you want to do? And I said, oh, I'm you know I'm considering options now beyond clinical practice. I had no options. I had zero options, right? And this gentleman was like, would you want to come interview for my team? I said, sure. Where do you work? And he's like, oh, I work at McKinsey. And I was like, sure, I would love to chat. And those are the days of like low bandwidth internet, where it was very difficult to search for 2G, 3G. I don't even know, some G.
Correct, correct. More like 2G.
And
GSM.
yeah, and then I ran into after he took his card, and I ran into the bathroom. I googled what is McKinsey, right? Like, I was living under a rock, right? I had no clue what McKinsey was or what management consulting was, and long story short, didn't end up working for him. Ended up doing a short stint at Samhita on the public health side, and then joined the Boston Consulting Group.
Yep.
And I think both those experiences were just fundamental in getting more grounded around how is it that you run businesses, how is it that you bring about large scale change. It's not about changing the behavior of one doctor or 5 doctors or 10 doctors. It's about changing the behavior of thousands of doctors and millions of patients, and a lot of training around technology and data systems was at these two firms. So
In fact, Samhita, I mean, is an NGO, and but a very respected NGO. I mean, I know a few people that even work there, and it's a very interesting path. Like, what was, like, you were working in the public sector, private space, also at BCG. So, what were the things that you were consulting on, or doing your
yeah. Absolutely. So we are mainly working with large health systems. So it could be the government, it could be a foundation, to help improving delivery of care at scale, right? So one of the projects was with the state government to help transform their primary care ecosystem. So we're talking about like thousands of health centers, hundreds of thousands of staff members. How do we start using that system and transforming it to deliver better care outcomes? So how do both for patients as well as for patient happiness as well as for patient clinical outcomes. So, and it wasn't easy, right? The work wasn't easy. The work had several stakeholders. It wasn't only the staff or the departments. It was also communities. It was also involving the bureaucracy, the political ecosystem of a lot of these state governments. So it was like very challenging, interesting work to help transform some of these stubborn and extremely non-agile health systems. So worked there, worked obviously with some health systems, worked with hospitals, worked with pharma in these different organizations. So got a fairly 360 view of the healthcare ecosystem, at least in India.
And then you went on to do what what your peers were already telling you to do, which was move to the US, but for a very different reason. You joined Stewart Healthcare. Very short stint. What was Stewart Healthcare doing, and what was your role there?
Yeah, I was. That was one of the short consulting stints I did in order to learn more and understand more about the ecosystem, right? So like when I was at BCG, a few years in, my boss asked me to get a real degree, like now go get some real education that is relevant to what you want to do. So was fortunate to get into the Wharton program. And AD, that was a very interesting time for healthcare in the world, right? That was the time when the large companies that we know today, the Livongos and the Teletalks and the Omadas of the world, were actually becoming real companies, right? All
Hmm.
throughout until then, there was a lot of funding, but there wasn't like adoption and traction. But that was slowly starting to change. And we were seeing these like mega rounds, these 100 million, $150 million rounds get into digital health at that point. And I thought to my, and going there, I was like, okay, it makes sense for me to like graduate from Wharton, go back to consulting. It's a lucrative career option. Work in the US, and as an immigrant, it's also easy, right, to do consulting. Visas are easy and all that stuff. But then, a few months into the program, I was like, this is, if I go back to consulting, it'll be, very stupid on my part, right? Like now's we were in the middle of this huge, uptick in the adoption curve of digital health. And I was like, I'm in the center of innovation, and I was the opportunity to actually join, startups or like start a company in the space rather than going to consulting. So started working with some startups, some like Steward Health, where they were larger health systems, some smaller startups who didn't have the money to pay me, or I was just working with them, and some did have the money to play. Oh, this is all during school, trying to build up experiences. And
So,
and when I came in, I was like, oh god, I've spent all this time in India in healthcare, and I have to learn a new health system. And when I came in, it's the US health system is very complex and very very different in a lot of ways compared to what we see in the rest of the world, right? There are like middlemen, and there are middlemen for middlemen, and then there's a
hmm.
regulatory body for middlemen, and then there are payers for middlemen, and there's a data analytics layer. So it's very complex. There are certain things that exist in the US healthcare system that don't exist anywhere else in the world, like pharmacy benefit managers. Anyway, so there's a lot of learning to do. But
I think
then
this was also around the time when Obamacare was coming into its, taking real shape at that time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it was also interesting because that was there were lots of differences, but there was still a lot of similarities. When I went to the front line and started working with these startups, the problems were were similar, right? Like patients still complained about quality. Patients still
Yeah.
didn't have, appointments. If I have to see an endocrinologist for the first time in Boston, I have like a 2.5 month waiting period. Like I can see a endocrinologist in Bombay in 2 days, right? But in the US, which spends $10,000 a patient, I still have to wait 2.5 months. So a lot of the problems still remain the same around quality, around access, around patient experience, around patient satisfaction. And in the US, we are incentivized to do more, right? As a primary care
Hmm.
doctor, we're paid, we reimburse fee for service. So if I do more tests, do more, scans, do more, that's, or see the patient more often, even if, it may or may not be relevant. And I was like, okay, it's the same thing, right? Like there are lots of differences, but there's the underlying fundamental challenges remain in healthcare, remain same wherever you are in the world. And so, spent a lot of time in early stage startups, and then was fortunate enough to join Iora Health, just before they completely took off on their growth journey.
Because in fact, before we talk about IRA, but because that's a very interesting part, and I've got a lot of interesting fun facts about that company. But you're right. Your experience in India and the US in terms of healthcare is about 3 years on each part. uh, and it's very interesting, like that you said, like that the problems are the same, even though US spends a lot more, probably, maybe 20, 30, 40 times more than India does on primary healthcare. But where did you find innovation was, I guess, where was there more innovation? Did you feel like, the place where there's more scarcity there's more innovation, or the place there's more surplus there's innovation in these two ecosystems?
So at that point in India, there was very limited innovation, right? We were just starting the e-pharmacy wave, and then the next wave was a telemedicine wave. The M Fines and the Practos of the world were gaining momentum. And so we saw, and the adoption was limited, right? Pre-COVID, or say going back 5 years, the adoption wasn't all that crazy. In the US, though, we were seeing interesting models come up in different disease areas as well, right? So, for example, Livongo created a very seamless experience for patients to receive diabetes care, coaching, filling in the gaps that existed in the ecosystem. That, how do I take care of my own diabetes? How am I as a patient
Hmm.
empowered to know how I'm doing on a daily basis? Through some of their monitors and scans, and then what kind of advice would make most sense? What kind of coaching and behavior change coaching would make most sense on the nutrition side, on the lifestyle side, in addition to the endocrinologist or my primary care doctor that I'm seeing, right? So a lot of the care model innovation or care delivery innovation started happening. That and healthcare has been bad with that, right? For imagine industries like financial services like fintech. Banks spend maybe 10, 15, 20% of their budgets on technology. That number for healthcare, 3 or 4 years ago, was 1 or 2%. Right, so these
Wow.
large legacy health systems that did billions of dollars of revenue operated fairly poorly and didn't spend any money on technology. So that obviously has started changing a lot, and that's what is exciting, right? How will technology disrupt the experience that we've had as patients and as providers, right? Like
True.
and if you think about healthcare, there are other spaces. There's so much innovation in biotechnology. You're seeing vaccines now being launched and approved in 8 months. Like we had the experience with COVID, things that
Right.
used to take 20 years before. Um, so there's innovation on the pharma biotech side. There's obviously innovation on the device side, but before the last 5 or 6 years, if you think about care delivery, your care interactions at the hospital, in the clinic, at home, they were like they were in 20 years ago, right? Nothing changed.
Hmm.
You would still
It was the
still wait
same
in line.
paper, right? The doctor was still writing on paper, and you
Yeah,
had to carry that slip around with you because the doctor didn't have
yeah,
the
and
records.
yeah, and then obviously the EMR adoption happened in the US, and still not happened in India, right? I think that's a wave that's going to happen, continue to happen. But you know, the the space I wanted to be in was obviously around technology disrupting healthcare, because that's what it was obvious. It was time, and we were seeing early signals at that point that it is bound. It started happening. It's already happening, and a lot of
So how did you get into IRA Health? Uh,
yeah, so I was, chasing down the CEO to forcing him to give me a job, and they said that, convince them to sponsor a visa for me. Spend a lot of time, before actually joining them, actually doing, different projects for them. Had an incredible
I would
time.
love for you to talk about that because a lot of people reach out to me, either to get a job at Eartha or even at some of the companies that we funded, and that's a very important part. Like getting them to buy into you, and I'd love for you to just talk about how you got that the CEO to invest into you because you invested in them first.
Yeah, no, was working with them when I was in business school, and had incredible time. Just for me, the interesting thing about IORA was obviously the mission was the right one. So providing fantastic care to seniors, to people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s, have not one or two, but 8 or 9 chronic conditions, and then they benefit significantly from better healthcare or better primary care. But all that was great. I think the difference was just the culture, right? So many times in organizations, like I read in textbooks and I read in articles that organizational culture matters, and I was like, what is this organizational culture? Like, I don't understand. Like, sure, I get it, like collaboration, fun, mission, like all that is, we had that at the Boston Consulting Group. We had that at my startup and my NGO. Like it wasn't real. When I then landed up in this,
It's not about all beers and pizzas on Friday, right? That's not culture.
yeah, and the culture is really like everyone is mission driven. Everyone here wants to change the world. Everyone believes in being empathetic and acting with courage and being passionate, and that I was like, okay, I have to be part of this organization, right? Like this is an organization that Obviously, I'll learn a lot. I'll be on the front lines, and I'll be learning, directly from patients and providers and from insurance companies as well, because it's an interesting model. And But it's people I want to work with, right? More important than that. So, long story short, was probably sent to 20 follow-up emails. I had job offers, kind of pressured them, saying that, okay, I have this. Also, got lucky.
You
There was,
created a bit of FOMO with them. They have other job offers.
and then stayed in constant touch, and then eventually convinced them to like sponsor a visa for me, and got in. So
And you joined them at a very interesting time. I think it was only a few months or maybe a few quarters after after you were part of the company that they raised a monster Series E 115 million in 2018, and it was obviously growing very, very, very quickly, right? So, so what was that experience like? You're inside a startup, and you're seeing this thing just balloon, right? And while the entire ecosystem was getting bigger, you were part of a rocket that was probably growing faster than the ecosystem. What was that experience like?
oh, it was incredible. A lot of chaos, a lot of learning, a lot of unlearning. We brought in, people from traditional healthcare, so there was a lot of like unlearning of what is normal, right? Because when you're inside a disruptive company, a lot of the rules are different, and so we had to, you know, even when we were building out the team and we got people from healthcare, the first month or two was just like in shock, right? Because we did things differently, and we were brave enough and courageous enough to do things differently, because that is the only way we would survive. Our CEO Rishika took a very courageous leap, 10 or 12 years ago, when most companies and most peers were buying software that was available, right? The electronic medical record software. But he built everything from the ground up, and expensive bet, but the right bet. Now that we've come to see it, because you can control. The goal was that, to fix a system that's so broken, you have to build from the ground up. So the growth trajectory was very interesting. We were adding both people to our corporate teams, so building better technology, building better service, building better trainings, and then also our clinics were increasing in number. Right, I think when I joined, we were at about 10 or 15. When I left, we were at about 50. So we had almost tripled in terms of the number of clinics. We had almost doubled or tripled the number of patients we had. We started taking more types of insurances, and so the company went through a couple of cycles of growth when I was there, and I was just incredibly fortunate to be part of that ecosystem, and be on the cutting edge of like what was new and unique at that point, and learning it from the inside.
And what was it like? I mean, you said that they did things differently, right? And that requires a tremendous amount of faith, because for the longest time, people will make fun of you. They will say you're absolutely crazy, or it's never going to work, right? And obviously there is every entrepreneur. I mean, I as an entrepreneur also sometimes sometimes when you have those weak moments start, or you feel like, oh, maybe am I actually going wrong? Am I really looking at this thing the wrong way? How was how are you keeping yourself motivated? What my CEO is telling me, what the founder sees, is absolutely correct, no matter what other people are talking about.
Yeah. No, so the good thing about Iora was that we were agile. Like we iterated, we built product every week. We
Acha.
didn't build product every 6 months, right? There were small changes every week. We built our service model very similarly, right? There were changes every week or two. We did a lot of experiments, a lot of internal experiments. We controlled our own data systems, so it was very easy to, and that's not very common in healthcare. Like it's less common than what you'd imagine, and so that's why the large health systems find it so difficult to innovate.
True.
But we were able to do a lot of experiments to see what is working, what is not, right? For example, one of the problems we faced that this is a difficult model, and we have to take care of patients in a very different way. And so our doctors tended to work a lot after hours, right? So there was a lot of like physician burnout. But we built data system to actually understand how many hours specific doctors are spending after work, right? Like, so are they spending 7 or 8 hours or 10 hours or 15 hours after work? because that leads to burnout, that leads to poor care, that leads to attrition, right? They leave, right?
True.
They go to the model. So then we built programs around reducing doctor burnout, right? And we were able to actually measure how, what does it have, a 20% impact or a 30% impact or a 40% impact, like of the 15 or 20 experiments we're running, which one maximizes results and what's the least expensive way to go forward and what's the ROI on these things. So right, we were able to run a whole bunch of experiments on different things like, the patient experience, clinical outcomes, patient retention, physician burnout, etc. And that we were able to do only because of, because we owned every part of the value chain.
Makes sense.
And then I think at the vision level, this was absolutely the right thing to do, right? The belief was that fee for service care is not good for anyone, especially not good for patients. Definitely not good for our total overall costs. We need to be in charge. We need to, think of the patient more holistically. And what matters is if they feel better, if they get better, and not the number of things you do on them, right? So if my patient is feeling, for example, if a diabetic patient has an HbA1c of, of 9, and through my work, the patient has an HbA1c of 7, that's victory, right? Not seeing them 20 times. If I see them twice, but I do a, more
Get
agile
the
program.
impact with less interaction. Yeah.
So outcome and cost were the drivers, and that was the right driver, right? It wasn't, we were not motivated financially to, our financial incentives and what was right for the patient was aligned, and that doesn't happen very often. So there was full belief, and that's why you see the amount of money that IORA raised. It's a difficult model. It's expensive, but the people invested in it because of the sheer
Yeah, in
belief.
fact, the next round was led by Premji Invest, raising 126 million Series F. This was a little bit of time before you had left, and I think Premji was just getting into writing such large checks, and Ira Health being one of those large checks. Temasek was a part of it as well. I mean, that must have been like a Chak De India moment. Did they play some Bhangra music or something in the office?
Yeah, I was in charge of helping my team pronounce the names properly. That was my job as one of the few brown people in the team. So, but jokes aside, I think that just reflected like global confidence in what we were trying to do. If you look at IORA's cap table, obviously we had an exit. All of us had an exit a few months ago when One Medical bought IORA, and that integration is in process. But if you look at the cap table, you have a large number of marquee investors there, right from the ones who invest at Series A, Series B, all the way to growth, like including Temasek and Premji. And that reflected the confidence people had in what we were doing. Internally, on a day-to-day basis, it was sometimes, obviously you're like, what am I doing? And obviously that anxiety is there. But I thought the mission kept us going.
And and like you said, sometimes it's also, if you have a CEO or a leader that is constantly reinforcing the bigger picture, the larger vision, the mission of why you're working those 16, 18 hours a day, probably definitely below market prices at times. But if you have that person who's constantly out there, like you said, it makes a huge impact even on your own motivation. You obviously have
Yeah.
a belief in him leading the way. So around the time Premji Invest was investing, and you were teaching people in your company how to pronounce their name, you say, what, maybe it's time to go on the other side of the table. Maybe it's time to start investing. Is that how it worked? Because just a few months later, you were at W Health.
Yeah, so I'd gone through 2 cycles of growth and with the company, and learned a tremendous lot. And now the company was, 700-800 people or so, and I think it was time for me to move on to my next adventure. I think a lot of the things that were broken when we joined, we had collectively, gotten to a really good place. And then got an incredible opportunity to work with Sunil Watwani, who's been a longtime mentor of mine. I know
Sure.
him right from my days at BCG, and have had the fortune of working with them all throughout. But like, got an incredible opportunity to build, W Health with them. And
Pankaj, could you demystify something for people that are listening in? Because a lot of these entrepreneurs, would have had a chance to have someone like a Sunil Vadhani to be around them, but may not have known how to convert someone like that with such amazing pedigree. I mean, Sunil is a billionaire and has built amazing companies, has an amazing background. How how did you how did you convince him to become your mentor? Right? What was that? What was that like? And if somebody else had to replicate it, may not be Sunil, but maybe anybody else. How do you actually go out and convince someone to become your mentor?
Yeah, no, I was just incredibly lucky. And maybe it's a question I should ask Sunil when we check in later today. But no, it is just being open to learning, and then also I had the opportunity to just work with him on small like consulting projects for some of the global health work that he and his family lead, both as part of Wish Foundation and Wadhwani AI Institute. So was involved there, helping them with some strategic projects. So that was always helpful to obviously get to know him and the Wadhwani family office and the Wadhwani family better. But I mean, it's just a series of coincidences that made me even meet him and work with him and so just incredibly lucky at different points in my life to.
And in many ways, W Health was also just starting out, right, at the time. I mean, this was a new initiative to start backing health tech ventures, and you were pretty much at the ground floor at the time.
Yeah, so I was employee number one, and we were thinking about the mission was simple. The mission is simple. Is that is going to be that technology is going to disrupt healthcare, and the care delivery that we know today will be very different 5 or 10 years from now. And we wanted to incubate and accelerate some of that adoption and change, both in the US but also globally, where the large part of the opportunity lied. So that was the broad mission, and we set up a fund to do some early stage investing focused on the US, really investing in only a specific type of companies, companies that are improving the delivery of care.
Okay.
So being very narrow gives us the able to go really deep in things like how do you build the great care model, how do you build the right product stack, how do you work with payers, how do you work with health systems, how do you get reimbursed, how do you show clinical impact, right? So we've taken the going deep approach in venture capital investing. And when we were looking at the landscape in the US, obviously a lot of innovation, a lot of excitement. We also started getting some inbounds from different parts of the world, and we decided to do a concentrated deep dive into India, and started talking to more and more founders who are trying to sometimes replicate the models in the US, sometimes try something totally different. And you're like, okay, looking at the impact that COVID had on the Indian digital health landscape as well, we're like, it seems like the right time to also start an India team. And this was about a year ago. And that's when AD, you and I met as well, to really see what the opportunity is here. And as we have learned over the last year, the now is the time, right? Like what the time for the US investors was about 7 or 8 years ago to invest in digital health. Now is the time to invest in the Indian landscape, and we're seeing some extremely promising signals from the companies we've invested in. Also
Okay.
seeing some incredibly promising signals from companies that we talk to on a daily basis.
And since you've been on both sides of the Atlantic or Pacific, wherever you're starting your flight from, uh, you know, did your like how did your on the ground experience of being in India, like you said, India suddenly becoming a very major concentration or focus point for W Health? Like, did that really come into play when you were, pitching the thesis for India?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that played a role. It's very difficult for US investors to invest in India
Very true.
without local teams. I think the problems seem to be similar at the highest level. Models, clinical models, and like company models seem to be the same, but the ground level realities around how patients will pay for this, how communities will react to it, what vested interests lie, they're very different, right? We all know about practices that are prevalent in India with providers, with health systems, with we all know the insurance ecosystem in India, which is very weak, and so a lot of the digital health companies monetize through patients paying directly out of pocket. So these are more consumer businesses, right? They're consumer businesses along with being healthcare businesses. So a lot of it is some of the things are same, but some of these things are different. And I think the experience of you know was helpful to have worked in India and then seen the innovation happening in the US, and seeing that there's this like there's this opportunity, and there are these white spaces that are frustrating, that don't have to be there. Like in 5 years, healthcare in India will be very different from what it is today, all thanks to the founders and the innovators who are
Sure.
thinking big now. And for that reason, I think success stories like PharmEasy and Innovator and are really helpful, right?
In fact, Dharmil was on a show about 3 or 4 episodes back, and we had a great conversation about how even for him, like trying to organize this whole pharmacy space was in itself an innovation. And one of the takeaways from that conversation that he had was like in India, if you're building, you can't wait to to try to build a house, right? You start with a wheel, and then you start with a unicycle basically, and then it converts
Yeah,
into a bicycle, and then it converts into a motorcycle, then a car, and then a car becomes becomes a house, and that's how you keep innovating all the way
yeah,
through.
yeah. So there are like two or three things that we've now, second, almost completing a couple of years. I think our thesis is about, right. We're investing early in the US, learning a lot of what's working, what's not from the US landscape. Trying to invest as early as possible in India, right? We don't invest pre-revenue yet, but hopefully someday we'll get there. But investing in the right teams, on innovation-led models, right? Models that are on the right side of healthcare change, that will scale to millions of users, not only in India but also globally. And then we're also incubating some early
Oh
stage
wow.
concepts. It's where we're seeing an opportunity, where we're seeing that no one is doing this. We're also in the mind space to backing early founders, and helping them incubate their ideas. But again, and we're building out a team both in the US as well as in India. So really excited about everything we're seeing, and the opportunity seems to be now to push the accelerator.
So what do you look for then in founding teams? And we'll talk a little bit about the investments as well. But what are you looking for in founding teams when you meet them?
I think very basic things that you would look in any business, right? Is this unique? Is this compelling? And what is the moat? We're seeing in India sometimes that there's a model that works, and then there'll be 50 companies that do the same thing. So we're not investing in
Sure.
crowded spaces. We're investing in spaces that are large. We still go for large total addressable market spaces. We're not in the US. We can invest in companies that are looking into very small areas, because there the dollar value of the market is still large. Every small market in the US is still $1 billion. In India, that's not the case. So in India, we're addressing large spaces like chronic diseases like diabetes and mental health and primary care and surgical centers, and so we're doing some of these large bets right now, because the ecosystem is still evolving and the willingness to pay is still shaping up. We're investing in companies that are addressing Bharat, right? Addressing one of our companies serves Indians in about 3,000 cities and towns. And 2 years ago, if you had told me that I'd be able to invest in a company that serves these 3,000 cities and towns more than the metros, I would say you're joking, because digital health was the privilege of a few of us, sitting in Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore. That change is happening thanks to connectivity, thanks to COVID. And so we're investing in innovation, really, in companies that are being focused on the patient, providing excellent clinical outcomes, providing the right clinical experience, and knowing that right now the technology leap India has taken is, now you used to see a doctor in person, now you see them over video, right? That's very
True.
linear innovation. I think there are 3 or 4 new phases and we're investing in the companies that are building the next phases of innovation, of technology adoption, of like how AI can play a role, how better care models can play a role. How can you
Do
be
you
taking
even
care
see a
of?
space for wearables? Because suddenly wearables in India is also becoming quite big. Not just obviously Apple is it's outside the reach of most Indians, but you've got
Yeah,
a Timex, you've got the Cashiers of the world coming out with connected devices, connected watches at 7,000 rupees, 5,000
yeah.
rupees, sub $100 cost, and you can connect to a primary care doctor very quickly. Are these also part of the innovation that you see moving forward?
Yeah, we're seeing about 100 companies a month in India. It's
Wow,
there's
it's
an
amazing.
incredible amount of entrepreneurial activity happening, and yeah, so we're seeing a whole bunch.
So I mean, I have one very I guess observation that I have now is that I notice you don't put doctor in front of your name. So is that a strategy so that when you're talking to Indian entrepreneurs, they have no idea that you were a doctor? So you can, whenever they're telling you something, you're like, listen, I know what's happening on the ground. Right? Don't try to tell me it's as bad as you're making it out to be.
Yeah, AD, I wish I thought as much as you do. None of that. I don't know. It's just not there.
I was like,
Probably I didn't know how to put it.
I was like, भाई तो जो बोल रहा है रहने दे मुझे पता है क्या होता है.
No, yeah, we learn a lot from every conversation, and I'm not just saying it. It's the I think Indian entrepreneurs still have to catch up when it comes to like being truly innovative. But I think their resilience and their jugaad mindset
Correct.
stands out, and we learn a lot from that, and hopefully are able to contribute some of the things we've learned from other markets.
In fact, on this point, I have a very interesting question from Jasgir Singh. He says that most healthcare startups are focused on operational excellence and IT. What's your experience or thoughts on ventures focusing on R&D?
Yeah, so if you think about R&D in healthcare, you could do R&D in biotech and pharma. That's not where we have our skills, and so we need a different skill set to be able to invest in that space. We don't, and so we don't invest in that space. We're very deep investors, so if we're investing in a company, we'll spend you know as much time as the founders need and find appropriate. Initially that could be 10-15 hours a week, during certain bursts, when you're building a new product, when you're like doing something strategic. So we like to be hands on. We wouldn't invest if we don't have the capabilities to. So I agree, Jagsir, that there's a lot of work happening in operational like improvements. We're trying to invest in slightly more deep tech companies that are using technology in the next layer, but not doing investments in pharma biotech. That's where a lot of the R&D is happening.
Just Kira, I hope your question was answered. I think that's a very fair deal because, like you said, you need a specific amount of expertise and maybe even patience to be investing in the R&D part of the
Yeah.
space. So coming back, you've made three investments that have been announced so far, and all of them were bunched pretty close to each other. You did Beto 14.1 million. You did Mars by GHC 5.2 million. Part of the round, and Visa you did 5.5 million. These were May, June, and June kind of investments. What you could tell us a little bit about each company and what your how why you chose them.
Yeah, absolutely. So Visa is a very special company, right? Based in Bangalore. They're trying to bring everyday mental health support to the world. I think in the US, also in many other countries, we have this huge shortage of therapists and mental health professionals, and that's always a barrier to care. What Visa has done has created an extremely compelling product for users, for patients to use, that uses very advanced conversational AI. A lot of the revenue traction that Visa has is actually outside of India, so it's a US and UK go to market for Visa. The incredible thing about Visa is they've not spent a single dime on marketing. When we were evaluating this, we realized that they've not spent anything on marketing, and they have about 3.5 million people who use Visa, uh, and people have had almost 500 million conversations on the Visa platform
Wow.
that have led to, and 9 out of 10 of these experiences have been positive and have helped patients.
It's
And
amazing.
so it's a the AI is not only clinically safe, but patients love it. And our experience with AI based, conversational AI based companies in the past has been that, if the AI is safe, patients don't seem to like it's not engaging enough. So I think with Visa, we're helping establish that AI can build a therapeutic relationship with the patient, right? Not only will the patient, it's not only that okay, there's there's some light digitization of what would happen when the patient is in front of a therapist, but it's actually like AI, building that therapeutic bond with the patient, and then being the first port of call in the mental health journey, and then so it's an incredible company that we're very excited about. And Beto is solving a very fundamental problem, right? We're 200 million diabetics, pre-diabetics, hypertensives in India, and Beto is building probably India's largest connected diabetes platform that provides really affordable, really culturally adept care to millions of people, right? So we've obviously seen, as a result of COVID, incredible adoption of the Beto platform. They've grown 6x in revenue, as one of the press releases that we had recently, just in the last year. Um,
Wow.
and um, and that's because they're providing things that people want, right? 70% of Beto users have never had a dietitian talk to them before. 70% of them never use 60% of them never used a remote monitoring device before. They never used a glucose. So Beto is their first these diabetics who have been diabetic for quite some time. Beto is providing them things for the first time ever, and they sell into 3,000 3,000 towns and cities across India. And a lot of their growth is actually coming from really small towns and cities that I haven't even heard of. And so my cousins in Yautmal are using Beto as much as my friends in Bombay. And they're not only bringing in the latest advances like connected glucose monitors and diabetes reversal programs, but they're also bringing just 101 diabetes care, which is affordable, which is the $10 price point. So really
Wow.
excited about that. GHC was a small co-investment for us, and they're building an incredible consumer brand for men's health and women's health. GHC is it's Mars for Men is a brand, and it's a quirky, fun consumer brand that basically works on sexual wellness, on skin, and other therapeutic areas. And a few deals in the works that we'll hopefully announce soon. But incredibly excited about just the three companies that I've just mentioned.
So it's a very interesting mix. Pankaj, one question though, like when a founder is approaching you, right? And obviously, you're investing, so you're obviously providing money. But besides the money, what else should a founder expect from you post investment?
I think we're we act like we're part of the founding team. And see, there are companies that we provide more value, and there are companies where we don't provide as much. I think whenever it comes to thinking about the clinical model, thinking about the product strategy, thinking about go to market, thinking about validation, I think those are partnerships, fundraising. Those are things that we're actively involved in, and uh, uh, we're not. I think the view that at least we like to have is we're not investors. We're there for you. We're co-founders, and then we also have the luxury of having access to advisors that sometimes startups individually may not be able to get. So
True.
we have spend a lot of time actually hiring for our teams, right? So we help with hiring the best talent. I think talent is one of the biggest constraints in health tech in India. And
Probably also scarce, right? There may not be as
Yeah,
much talent as we think there is.
we don't have a bench like in the US. We're slightly more fortunate to have people who've worked in companies now that have scaled a lot and have had VP and senior VP and director level positions, who are now they're ready for the next C-suite kind of positions. But in India, that ecosystem doesn't exist. So it will exist it will be created in 5 years, but today that's not there. So we're actually spend a lot of time actually helping them hire the right leadership positions as well.
Very interesting. In fact, I think we'll take one question from Mukund, and then I want to talk about a little bit more about what's happening. You know, in the future for W. But Mukund asked that what are the main barriers in your opinion for EHR adoption and health insurance uptake in India?
Yeah. So health insurance is interesting. We're seeing an uptake now. The space is growing, what, 16, 18% every year. We feel that about 46 to 50% of Indians will be insured by 2026, either through a private insurance plan, a group insurance plan, or one of these, one of the government insurance plans. So I think that adoption is going the right way. It's an extremely interesting space. We're seeing a lot of innovation, and we're talking to a large number of companies in health insurance today. And they could be innovating around actually underwriting and taking risks. They could be innovating around they could be in the space like Policy Bazaar, where they're actually brokers and distributors. They could fix some of the pain points around insurance. That could be around claims processing or building these APIs that are needed. So there's a lot of innovation happening in these areas, and it's a space that we're extremely excited about. EHR adoption is challenging because health systems in India don't like paying too much for software. I was at Stewart and also did some work with partners and in Boston, and partners spent more than $1 billion in bringing on Epic as the EHR vendor. $1 billion is the market cap of some of these large health systems we have in India, right? So I think we're far from universal EHR adoption, mainly because of the willingness to pay. In the US, there was a steep increase in the EHR adoption because of policy and because of the incentives that the government gave. Now, in the absence of that, like monetary, financial incentives or disincentives in India, it's going to happen, but the quality of the EHR platforms are just not going to be at par with what we see globally, because because of the dollars at play here are not large.
See. So when should an entrepreneur be approaching you, like, so that they're not too early? Should they be approaching you like when they've started generating some revenues, or is it when they have strong attraction, starting
Yeah.
to see some product market fit? Like, what's the stage?
Yeah, 6 months ago, AD, I would have said when you have revenue and when you have some semblance of product market fit. Now, I think we've built our team to actually talk to every founder at
I see.
whenever they. So we try to respond to most texts we get. We try to schedule time with most people. And if not, we definitely share some feedback, even if it takes a couple of weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to share.
And that's something I really like. I mean, I've shared a number of ventures with you, because we're also looking at health, but we have not even 1% of the bandwidth and the depth that you all do. But I've always noticed that Pankaj, you're very quick with feedback. Is that something you're doing with other founders as well?
We try, and of course, I'm sure we're missing out on a few, and I'm sure we get emails saying, oh, never got a response, and so it's an internal team KPI that every deck that we receive should get a response or should get a call, because that's the promise we're making, right? Like, if you have an idea, get in touch with us, and obviously we invest only in about 0.5% of the companies we see in India,
Sure.
so the number is still extremely small. But I'm hoping that we will have more conviction over time to invest earlier and invest in more innovative ideas as well.
So with that, I want to talk a little bit about the breakfast revolution. I know. I said that if we went over, we would not. But I really think this is such a great thing. So maybe Pankaj, I'll just let you talk about how it started. The whole story and how
Yeah.
it is working with a family member in setting up TBR.
Yeah, absolutely. So this started when I was the angry young physician phase, right? Like, where everything around me is broken, and like, why doesn't someone else fix this? One day I was seeing a patient, and the patient had come to me the fourth week consecutively and was showing this like weight loss every week. Patient with tuberculosis, a 14-year-old boy, would come with his both his parents, and was actually deteriorating pretty badly, right? Like, he would survive, he would make it, but I was like, every time I would prescribe a protein powder, that have this protein powder, because he's vegetarian, had belonged to the low income community, and so and then I was like, trying to counsel the father, like, just go out and buy protein powder. He's like, do you know how much it costs? I said, in my whatever, I said, I don't know, a couple hundred rupees. He's like, "Ha, saab, I can't afford it." And obviously, struck me that I was being so probably had no empathy or no realization that what I'm recommending is actually not covered in the pharmacy in the hospital, and they would actually have to go out and buy it, and it they're probably earning $3-4 a day, and so went home. We would get a lot of these samples from our medical reps, and so took a few samples home. And I was like sitting with my mother, and I was like, "Why is this like pouch? The 10 gram protein pouch costing 50 rupees? Like it doesn't seem like it's going to be this expensive." We did a bunch of like homework and reading, and visited one or two factories around for that a relative of mine used to run, and realized that I can make this at home for 5 rupees. So I'm like, if I'm
Wow.
making this at home for 5 rupees, why
There's a
is this?
factory at 50. I mean, selling it
Yeah,
at 50. Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, it's incredible. So I was very impatient, right? So we started making soy milk at home, and we then again incredibly lucky. I didn't know how to fortify foods, right? I had no background in like food science, so I emailed I think head of R&D at Amul, and I emailed the premix head at Piramal just randomly, like, and I thought like, and they'll never respond to me. Both of them responded like within a day, and like actually helped us, with like for free, like with no any
That is
no financial.
amazing.
They helped
Wow.
us understand how to fortify in a small batches, right, which is unheard of at that point. And anyway, so long story short, realized that fortified, like after a year, realized that fortified soy milk is a really bad idea. Though we can manufacture for 5 rupees, the logistics and delivery of like transporting something across long distances is probably more than the cost. And then we've evolved. We have about 15 or 16 fortified foods that we make today. They're all organic, all taste natural, all under the 10 rupees price point, and we distribute about now we're doing about 2 million meals a month to about 200,000 odd children we've served. But the goal is
That's
to
wow. That
provide.
is amazing. And how are you managing that sitting in Boston?
I have an incredible team. I only talk about, I do the fun part of talking and fundraising, but the real work, actually, my mother leads the organization, and we have
I
an
see.
incredible team and an incredible network of partners and donors, and the government has been fantastic in their support as well. So again, been incredibly lucky, and but there's a long way to go, right? We serve 200,000 children. I think 80% of our children in India actually don't get a morning breakfast. Right, the first meal that they have is a midday meal at school, which is again not extremely nutritious. So there's a long way to go for us here on and really
And
fighting.
this is set up like an NGO, or how is it set up?
It's a social enterprise, and so non-profit. All the money that we make goes back into scaling the program.
Acha.
And a lot of the NGOs have feeding budgets. A lot of the governments have feeding budgets, so they pay for this, right? So we don't have to raise that kind of capital that we would have otherwise had to. And then some of these programs are completely philanthropic, right? So during COVID, we distributed about 10 odd million meals because people had just lost their livelihood and didn't they were
That's
down to one meal a day. So, but a long way to go, man. It's tough. It's very tough to scale a physical food enterprise.
I would imagine. I mean, but it's such a noble cause. I mean, you know, 200,000 kids. That's massive. That's amazing. And I mean, we were looking for one cause to back, and I want to talk to you about it offline. But I think we've got something very interesting that we're doing, due to some target that we've hit internally. I would love to talk to see how we could support this, because I mean, feeding children and making sure they stay in school is one of my personal goals in life, right? And a lot of the time, because children are not well fed, it also leads to poor performance in school, and then dropping out. So
Yeah.
would love to be part of this. I mean, this is an amazing venture, an amazing idea, and hats off to you, man. I mean, sitting there in Boston, and truthfully, throughout your career, that you've always taken the road less traveled, and you've always taken the thing that is right versus the thing that is easy. That's how I would summarize it if somebody asked me to do it in one sentence, and you can see where you are today because of that.
I think you're being extremely generous in your praise. I've been the confused one, right? To doing random things at random points, and now when I look back, it looks like in your words, in a straight line versus when it really wasn't. But thank you, and I think it's because of people like you and donors like you that we can dream big. And you know, 500,000 children in India die because of malnutrition. Things that we know how to treat, right? We can treat in $10. It's incredibly we're incredibly fortunate to have the ability to try to change that. And I do the fun part of it, but my team doesn't take the work, lightly. It's difficult work, and it's so thank you, thanks for the.
I'll definitely talk to you offline about that. So now with this, I mean, I know we're over by a bit, but we'll quickly move to rapid fire. There's a couple of very interesting
Oh god.
questions I'll take at the end,
Okay.
but we'll make it simple for you, Dr. Jethwani. We're not we'll be nice to you, right? This time around at least. But you know the rules. Quickly, there's going to be about 7-8 questions. First thing that comes to mind, just go ahead and say it out, and I'm sure with your wealth of experience, there'll be some interesting story to get a little bit deeper into. Let me get started. Is that okay?
Of course, absolutely.
Fantastic. So the first question, what's one mistake you believe that every founder must avoid?
So a lot of times, sometimes founders drive go for like vanity metrics. I think just stay simple, right? Focus on why you're unique, why you're compelling. Focus on the experience of your consumer, and deliver value, right? If you're on the right side of change, things will happen. So stop chasing some like fancy vanity metrics that you probably read some investors care about. Just be true to you're building a business, right? Like build a solid business.
Yep. No, great. And and like you said, it's a vanity metric. It's a lot of fluff, and eventually,
Yeah.
it all comes back to what is actually on the books and can be seen.
Yeah,
Uh,
the one more thing that I was advised, a few years ago that I'm going to repeat is the the main thing is to keep the main thing, right? So
yep.
sometimes founders lose focus.
That's a good
Uh,
one. Can we get that on the screen? The main thing is to get is if you just repeat that. The main
the
thing.
main thing is to keep the main thing. I'm quoting someone, right? So I don't know
Yeah.
who that is, but and focus is extremely important when you're solving difficult problems, and it's very tempting to like try like 20 things, and of course it's important to, but I think once you like being focused as a founder and being all in is super important.
No, that's a great first answer. Second one, let's take it a little bit lighter. Who's your favorite superhero?
I don't have one. Maybe Black Panther.
Black Panther. Oh wow, this is the first time someone's named him in
Yeah,
48 episodes. By the way, nobody. I
yeah,
mean, I think Batman is Batman and Iron Man are probably off the charts, but
yeah.
first time someone says Black Panther. Why Black Panther?
I don't know, just got a really good vibe. I think is a interesting mix of modern civilization and science and just like
Yeah.
brute power. And we need more diverse superheroes, right? Like I think there are so many people from different backgrounds who do amazing things, and I think some of them need to come to the forefront.
Wonderful. Wow, that's a great answer and a great pick. I mean, no one has said Black Panther till date, by the way. One thing you would like to change about the Indian startup ecosystem.
I think focus on. Sorry, I'm sounding like a broken record here. Like focus on like being unique and compelling, right? We're seeing 50 companies of one kind sometimes. I think so. The question that every founder should ask is, what is my? Am I unique? Am I compelling to my user? And what is my moat? How do I, like, if I'm different, how do I continue being ahead of the curve? And what is the IP that I'm generating here? So I think that's at least in I only look at healthcare in India, so that's my limited experience in that space.
I see. That's a great answer too, right? I mean, the value of a business is derived by how long it would take someone else to copy it and move faster than you. And like you said, you have to be different. You have to have that moat, as we call it. What is one lesson that you had to learn the hard way? And I know you would say that every lesson I've taken is the hard way, but what would be the one lesson that you learned the hard way?
Um, I think a couple, right? One is just around being extremely hyper focused. in products that you're building, in hypotheses that you're trying. Like I'm an impatient person, and so I want to do 20 things at once, and things don't work out that way. So I think it's just about prioritization, focus. The second is burnout, right? Founder burnout is real. We don't talk about it, both like emotional, mental, and it's kind of stigmatized to talk about founder depression, founder burnout. It's real. So take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, there'll be no business.
Very
And
true.
so I think the I've learned it the hard way several times, and I think trying to prioritize that more and more.
Uh, if we can ask you this question, I know it's still early days, but is there a company that in your anti portfolio that hurts you the most?
It's not been long enough for us to. So I think we've missed a. We've said no to a lot of incredible companies. I think I was just chatting with one of them, my friend Ryan Grant, who's building an incredible musculoskeletal company in the US called Vori Health. We had the opportunity to invest at them at seed, and wasn't able to make that, weren't able to cross that bridge. And I think they're solving an incredibly important problem of providing awesome like musculoskeletal management in the US,
Wow.
and really bringing down the costs and the needless surgeries that people are having to do. So incredible company. I'm obviously rooting for him and the team that he's built. Won't be surprised if that's the we hear that it's a unicorn in few
Oh wow.
months.
We would love. I'd love to hear that story. And invite
Yeah.
him to the show one of the days in the future. I'll I'll take the last question now. Before we ask obviously the obvious last question after this one, but the Peter Thiel question. One thing that you know to be true, but very few people agree with you on this.
Dude, these are really difficult questions.
they,
One
they, they
thing,
go up in order of intensity, right? We take you from seed all the
yeah.
way to Series A.
So if I think about my wife, I will say that I still remember some things. You can trust my clinical acumen and doctor skills. I think I still have some of it left. My wife would highly disagree with that. So I would say I think I still have some of that gray matter left, and I think she'll disagree. She listens to any other physician except me. I shouldn't be saying this aloud, but anyway.
It's the story of every Indian innovator. It's You are not alone in this. My mother, my father, nobody believes anything that I talk about. But if the same thing is said by somebody else, it is 100% believable. I mean, the same exact words could be parroted by somebody else, but it's believable, but not you. ये
Yeah,
Indian लड़कों का problem है. Just don't take it
yeah.
personally.
And the thing is, I then go and say I told you so, and apparently there's a that phrase is banned in the house, so I can't
Yeah,
say it.
there you
So I'm like,
go. But you didn't say it right. That's the reason. Last question. What are three books you would recommend to any founder?
there are lots of them. A lot of founders, especially when they're not in healthcare, they really open up, and they like, they always ask me about their term sheets, right? So I think Venture Deals is a incredible book.
Great book.
I think the tagline is no more than your lawyer and VC investor. So that's a
Very
must
true.
read. It's a dry read, so read it, read relevant sections. I think the other is the New Business Road Test. It's a very fundamental focused like business book, right? Like nothing fancy, no, just like fundamental hardcore business, right? Like focus on your margins, focus on scale, focus on your moat, focus on like very like so 7 8 fundamentals of building a business. A really incredible book. I'm actually reading a book right now called Super Founders. It's
Sure.
by Ali Tamaseb. He's a venture capitalist in the US. He's basically taken like 30,000 data points for companies that have become unicorns, and 30, a lot of them for companies that have not made it, have raised money but not made it. So it kind of removes the biases that we have around investing. And so maybe it's, to get inside like a VC said, I think that could be interesting read for founders.
Very
It's a really
super
good, it's a really good
founders.
read. Yeah. And then maybe one book, it's a very light read, is The CEO Within. I think a founder friend of mine recommended it to me. It's literally like 50 or 60 pages. Super easy read on like how should you run an effective company, right? Like what are some good behaviors? It's like a one-on-one, like, so well, lots more that these come to mind.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pankaj. I'm definitely going to pick up Super Founders and the CEO within to read right away, and then move on to the other two. But again, I mean, it's been such an incredible conversation. I think even though we've been at this for 75 minutes, it just doesn't feel like there
Uh,
was any lack in energy, right, all the way through. But unfortunately, I think there is one person, and she's a student, and I think her question is very, very relevant. So I hope I can ask you this last
of
question
course.
before we shut for the night. But it's Ankita Bhatia. Ankita says that, and I think she's an MBBS student. She said, "How should a medical student who's interested in digital health tech approach a career in the same, despite lack of non-traditional opportunities after MBBS?" I think such a relevant question. That's why I'm asking you that.
Yeah, Ankita, this is my life, right? Like this is the same dilemma I had several years ago. I think just there are so many opportunities today in the startup ecosystem in health tech in India. Just find one of these companies that are doing incredible work, and start and learn in any position. There'll be a lot of work, for someone with your background. Companies will find the right kind of work, and then just grow. The other road that a lot of my friends take is going down the consulting route, right? I think working in a BCG or a McKinsey or a Deloitte gives you some of the fundamental like learnings that you can then apply to health tech going forward. So I would say definitely work, and like and overdoing anything else, and it really worked, helped me open my horizons. But we didn't have the health tech ecosystem we have today, 10 years ago or 12 years ago. But I would definitely consider working for some of these really exciting companies.
And if you can't get through to them, take a cue from Pankaj, and just keep following up with more and more emails till they finally answer. I think that's definitely an amazing piece of advice for anyone looking for a job with a high flying founder, or even in VC for that matter. Right, follow up really, really helps. So Pankaj, thank you so much. I think I've taken 80 minutes of your time on a beautiful Chicago morning, I'm sure. Uh, and but I think this was some incredible learning, and like while everything did look linear, but again I come back to saying, just talking to you, I can understand that you had choices to make, and you always took the choice that you think was right versus the one that you thought was easy, and that is one of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation. Any final words from your side?
No, I think thank you for this incredible show. It's a lot of fun. I didn't realize it was 80 minutes. We've gone through 80 minutes. The one final thing I'll say is I still you know advice to founders would be to actually be courageous. A lot of this is difficult, and the many very few people right to the top. I still cold email people all the time, and I see incredible results with it. So you should, like, for Ankita and for others who've dropped messages, you'll find a lot of people are there to help you, and I think you just have to ask. So if you don't ask, the answer will always be no. But AD, thanks a lot for this. This has been incredible fun, and I think we're at the start of something really exciting for the Indian healthcare ecosystem, and really look forward to hopefully finding a way to work with you sometime.
Absolutely. Same here, and I'm going to be sending you a few more opportunities, and look, I'm sure we'll find some way to work together,
Yeah,
and be part of that 0.5% that you're investing every year. Thank
awesome.
you so much, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you again. Like I said, we're doing this new format, so we'll be back in about a couple of weeks with a new episode. And until then, thank you so much, Pankaj. Have a great day in Chicago. I am completely jealous. One of my favorite series in the world, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye, everyone.